This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Make It Plain. One of the most popular subscriptions, Substacks that you can get is Pressrun.media. Everyone is checking it out. And I think I may have to add to his title, because the more I read it, the more I think it's apt to describe our friend as sort of a mainstream media ombudsman. One that we've not, I remember years ago, I can't remember his name. Washington Post had a really great ombudsman. I can't remember his name, but he was good. And I'm probably talking about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you remember him, Eric? You remember that guy? There was a guy, and he had a regular column too.
Yeah. Well, they used to, real quick. I mean, they used to all have them, and the New York Times fired theirs after the 2016 campaign because she wrote 2 columns critical of their Russia coverage during the 2016 campaign.
That's right.
And the New York Times editor says, we don't need this anymore. And now they're unaccountable. But go ahead. Yeah.
Anyway, that voice you hear that I was introducing is none other than the author of Pressrun.media. Please do subscribe. Eric Boehlert, a fearless media commentary. Hey, man, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. We haven't talked in a little while. A few things I want to go over. We'll start with the most recent and go backwards. Still, this coverage of the Republican Party and its behavior as normal. Still unwillingness to call it what it is. And as your headline says, well, let me ask this: you say they have no idea how to cover it.
Yeah.
That they have no idea, or at times is this willful?
Yeah, I tend to, believe it or not, I tend to err on the side of being nice sometimes, because that's a good question. I mean, these are all bright. If we're talking about the DC media, all people on paper who are very bright and accomplished, and then, the cream of their crop. How do they not understand what's going on? Jay Rosen, who's on Twitter and is a professor of journalism at NYU, talks a lot about this. And we have one party that is now opposed to the democratic process. We've never seen anything like this in American history, certainly never modern American history. I write in my column that if Liz Cheney is being purged because she will not support Trump's lies about the election, and it's not just the lies about the election. Look, if this had just been a Trump phenomenon and it had stopped at the water's edge when he lost, and everyone had reverted to normalcy, that would be one thing. We have the Republican Party pushing, passing voter suppression laws. They're setting themselves up basically to deny future election victories by Democrats. Washington Monthly had a really good piece this week asking, what if they refuse to certify elections? And not just presidential ones, city council, governor, mayor, senator. They are setting up, they're creating what Trump didn't have. Trump said, I won. He went to the court 60 times. He went to these states. He went to state Republican secretaries of state. They all said, no, we're not going to do this. And so what the Republican Party, and this is really important, the Republican Party learned from that. And they said, next time we're going to have a backstop. Next time we lose a presidential election, we're going to have all this infrastructure in place that will throw out millions of ballots, that will overturn elections. And so that insurrection, 2020, was not a mirage. That was the starting point for a frighteningly anti-democratic movement. And which brings us back to our point, how is the press supposed to cover this? How should the press cover this? Mm-hmm. We do not have a center left versus a center right in this country anymore. That's the holy grail. That is what the Beltway press has operated around for 50 years. Center left, center right. As far left as the Democrats go, the Republicans are equally far to the right. That has been blown up. We have a Republican Party that is off the rails, as I describe it in my column, into the abyss. And the media is still covering it as sort of this mainstream entity that deserves respectful coverage.
Yeah, yeah. And Eric, in his latest piece, folks, highlights several of the things that happened in the past week, including this coverage. The Washington Post reporter Mariana Sotomayor told CNN that and this is speaking of the Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ocasio-Cortez encounter. She said, quote, "This really does speak to the polarization that exists and the tensions between both parties." What Eric writes, wrong, what Taylor's deranged behavior speaks to is a Republican Party that has torn down the guardrails of common decency. And in that statement, and with a lot of these media, you still see this need to do the both sidesism.
Yeah.
The false equivalency. I'll tell you one way they could cover it. I mean, if we want to be, historic and accurate and factual, it's a form of projection to continue to promote the big lie, Eric.
Yeah.
I mean, we know how many elections have been won suspiciously, especially in the White House. But we can go back to, it's like people have forgotten about 2000.
Exactly.
People have forgotten about 2008. So it's perfect projection for them to now say, "Oh, we're going to make sure that there's never an election a Democrat wins again.
Yeah.
That we don't call for fraud."
Right.
So the media could just cover that. It would still be objective. These are facts. There are questions about 2000. Well, we can go before that. We can go to Nixon and Watergate. They're just
right.
the whole debris field of tricky behavior, crookish behavior, so to speak, and they won't acknowledge it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, a couple of people have been pointing out, they're trying to create this false equivalency. There was polling after the 2000 election that a lot of Democrats didn't think Bush had won fairly. And I pointed out he didn't. Supreme Court made Florida stop counting the votes. I mean, that's not even in doubt. But I said, good news, there was no bloody insurrection. So what are we talking about here? Yes, Democrats or liberals may have raised questions about elections in the past, but my gosh, don't compare it to what's going on. And a quick point, there was a House race in 2020, last cycle. A Republican won by 6 votes. And Nancy Pelosi has seated that Republican member as the winner. Can you imagine? If a Democrat, in a red state had pulled off a 6-vote victory? And I went back to, last winter when a lot of people were saying, well, this is just bad sportsmanship. He's just acting out. This is going to be fine. He's not trying to overturn the election. Biden won by 7 million votes. We're fine. And my point was, imagine if that election had been close. Imagine if Biden had only won by Michigan, where he won by 20,000 votes. Does anyone think in retrospect that Joe Biden would be sitting in the White House today? Absolutely not. Right. So, we dodged a bullet in 2020 because Biden ran such a great campaign. He won by 7 million votes. It was kind of a mini landslide if you look at the vote totals. But again, what the Republican Party is doing is setting up the infrastructure so that doesn't happen next time. And they are in the process of question. They're going to question all conceivable Democratic victories because they're going to have, like I said, they're going to have that corrupt backstop in place. And that's why the Liz Cheney story matters. And because it represents something so much larger and sinister. I'm not a fan of hers. She said yesterday, I'll never vote Democrat in my life. Well, good for you. You're not, you don't agree with anything that we agree with. But the fact that she, has not only been purged from leadership, I doubt she'll be in Congress in 2 years. She'll be voted out. There's almost no question in my mind. And what that shows is just how dangerous and detached from reality. Real quick, McCarthy, the House leader, says, "Oh, I've had it with Liz Cheney." She got purged for saying exactly what Kevin McCarthy said on the House floor, 3 days after the insurrection. Trump was to blame. And then he comes out of the White House this week. He says, "Oh, no one's questioning the election results. Let's move on." So the hypocrisy is just kind of nonstop and dangerous.
It is. You're giving us a heads up about what we can expect going forward and need to be prepared for it. More MIP after this message. You mentioned Biden's somewhat of a landslide. Love this headline too. We didn't get to talk about this. You wrote, if Biden were a Republican, press would tout him as a new Reagan.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And I'm old enough to remember the way Reagan was covered. I still have PTSD and trauma. I was and I think I've shared this before. How old was I? I was 13.
Yeah.
But old enough on Inauguration Day to realize, and nobody reported this, that the minute Ronald Reagan took his hand off that Bible, the hostages were released. And at 13, Eric, I said, something ain't right about that. But what I just said was never reported like that. It was just the hostages have been released.
Right.
There was never a story in mainstream media asking a question, what was it about him? Because they didn't wait an hour, or they didn't wait 24 hours. They literally announced the release of the hostages.
Right.
When he said, I do solemnly swear. And there was not a single story. We didn't have the internet yet back then. It was a time of no internet. I mean, if guys like us had been around, there was internet, we would have wrote about it. But there was never, it was 500, day 500 of the hostage crisis. But it was never a story, hey, what was it about him ending his oath that got the hostages released all of a sudden?
Right.
So, but you're right. They would cover and all the sweeping things that Biden is doing.
Oh yeah.
Which has been somewhat shocking and surprising. Some of us have had to change our view about it because friends of ours, I'm a friend of yours, all of us have been like, Biden has been more progressive than we thought he would even be.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. People might not know or not, looking back, not realize, Reagan was this conservative Republican. So, of course, the Beltway press was really tough on him, right? No, it was quite the opposite. In fact, the press was coming off, 5, 6, 7 years after Watergate. And they really felt like, and there's an amazing book by it's called On Bended Knee. And, the editor, Ben Bradley, the Washington Post, is quoted saying, well, we might have gone a little far with Watergate. We need to kind of rein this all in. Reagan, is serious. These are businessmen. They know what they're doing. We need to pull back. So he was greeted as a savior. His press coverage was just unbelievable. And obviously ran counter to this idea of a liberal media. So my point was, if Biden came in 20 points more popular than his predecessor, basically fixes COVID vaccination, is opening up the. I mean, he would be hailed as this modern hero, a master communicator. He's got 98% support among Democrats, which no president has ever achieved. The only president in American history who has higher inter-party approval rating. George Bush got to 99% 2 weeks after 9/11. That is the only. Biden is a political phenomenon. And we saw 4 years of Trump voter stories because Trump was so popular with the base. Oh my gosh, they love him. Biden is more popular today with Democrats than Trump ever was with Republicans. But boy, you would not know it from the press coverage. The press sees him as kind of this placeholder. They don't really seem to take Biden very seriously. His accomplishments are just kind of a shoulder shrug. There was this amazing clip from a White House briefing this week, a reporter, looking to the oil, the oil shortage because of the attack, looking at the Middle East, basically saying, gee, how's the Biden White House going to deal with a crisis? You guys haven't really had to deal with a crisis yet. The pandemic killed 600,000 people.
Right.
And the Biden administration fixed it so quickly and so effortlessly. The press thinks, they haven't faced a challenge yet. I mean, it's just kind of amazing. Now,
that's the Reagan contrast, but I wonder, I did see on social media, I don't know if any media picked this up, but there were some trolls on social media, and it was trending at one point when the gas thing happened. They were comparing Biden to Jimmy Carter. This is Jimmy Carter 2.0. But I couldn't really tell whether any media had picked that up.
Yeah, yeah.
And hopefully not. You also have written about how even the Washington Post may owe Joe Biden an apology.
Oh yeah, yeah. That for the border coverage. I mean,
Yeah.
the Washington Post in March went all in on these Republican talking points. This was a crisis. The Biden administration was responsible for the crisis, which is false. These surges are seasonal. There was a pandemic buildup. There was lots of reasons why the numbers spiked. And the Trump and the Post was just relentless in terms of these negative headlines. Fast forward to late April. It turns out the number of children and teens held in custody at the border had dropped 84% in a month. And suddenly the Washington Post wasn't interested in that good news. I still don't think to this day they've reported that statistic. So it's kind of this, we've talked before, every news cycle in the Beltway starts around the premise, what are Republicans angry about today? And they were angry about the border. They didn't care about it when Trump, ripped families apart. But they were very angry about the border. ABC News this week sent their entire show 1 week in March. They broadcast from the border. They built a new set just so they could be on the border to address this crisis, which some people, the pundits suggested it might derail Biden's entire presidency. Well, what happened to the crisis? Look around. The numbers are down. Biden did exactly what he said he did. The Department of Health and Human Services built all these temporary shelters. So children and teens who aren't supposed to be held in sort of police custody at the border are no longer held. He did exactly what he said he did. He fixed it. Is there still a border issue? Of course, there will always be a border issue. But the press ramped that thing up like it was going to end his presidency. He fixes it. Crickets, just kind of shoulder shrug. Oh, the pipeline, that's the new crisis. The Middle East. Oh, the Middle East is going to doom his presidency. And it's all just following, it's just the Republican Party leading the press around by a leash.
More MIP after this message. Also, no apology from the New York Times for its coverage of the Mueller report. The mainstream media was definitely involved in killing that. The judge, as we all know, and again, folks, Eric and I haven't talked, so we can call him on a lot of these stories. But Eric wrote about that, and how the mainstream media still needs to be held accountable for its inability to reverse itself, to do self-correction, to acknowledge what it helped to promote that was false. And the New York Times, as the newspaper of record in this country, allowed Bill Barr to put that lie out about the Mueller report without scrutiny. All of us knew that required, because just to be clear, the only journalists are not at the New York Times. Eric's a journalist. I'm actually a journalist. I'm gonna be honest with you, that's what my degree is in. It's one of my degrees. My undergraduate degree is in journalism. All right. So I'm not just running my mouth on a show. Right. I actually went to school to learn how to see something and then examine, the 5 W's and H, who, what, when, where, why, and how. Right. And that's what others seem not to want to do. And then Eric also at Pressrun.media has also pointed out to us how there's still an interest in covering what Republicans think, but not an interest in getting a lot of interviews and quotes from Democrats.
Yeah,
what they think is going on, right, Eric? It's like we only want that side. We don't want to highlight what Democrats think about some of these issues, Liz Cheney and otherwise.
Yeah, another perfect example of this, what are Republicans angry about? That equals news. Head of the CDC went up to the Hill, there was a House hearing. Oh, everyone's so upset at the CDC. This was right before they changed their mask guidelines. Oh, everyone's so upset at the CDC. CDC faces harsh criticism. And the New York Times, they quoted 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and the Democrat was quoted, in the 19th paragraph. So Republicans spent the day at this hearing attacking the CDC with, nonsense and baloney and, masks are tyranny and all this nonsense we've heard. But if Republicans are yelling at a public official, that's the news. That's the story. And And I'm sure more than one Democrat made a salient point during that hearing, but the New York Times wasn't interested. That's not what qualifies as news.
And as we discussed before, the algorithm is still seemingly mostly about conflict and drama and confusion and whatnot. Now, but in good news too, folks, Eric also reports on what's happening. Tell our audience before we go what's happening with Australia and the Murdoch empire. That's a good thing.
Yeah, if we think we have it bad here, arguably Australia has it worse. That's Murdoch's home country. He controls something like 60% of the newspapers. So in America, he has the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal. So imagine if he owned the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune and the Dallas Morning News and the LA Times. I mean, he has a stranglehold, and he has 24-hour news and internet news over there. But the Murdoch media is much more involved in Australian politics. They're basically part of the coalition. There's a Conservative Party coalition, and Murdoch media basically picks and chooses cabinet members. And if you step out of line, you have to deal with Murdoch media. So in that regard, it's a little different here. But it's just, and really, it's dangerous. And they kill people there just like they killed Americans with Fox News and COVID, because they had these bushfires in 2019 and 20, devastated millions of acres. And the Murdoch media was, still running down climate change and still attacking people. So there's a real life consequence to the people over there. And so it was very interesting last month. Two former prime ministers on different ends of the political spectrum got together and urged, parliamentary hearings and urged the government to address the media diversity. It would be like if George W. Bush and Barack Obama had got together and said Congress needs to investigate Fox News. That's how dramatic and open it is over there. And they're trying to save their democracy, just like people here point to Fox News. Former prime ministers in Australia say that our democracy cannot survive what Murdoch is doing to this country and to this government. Yeah.
So that Eric's giving you a hint, George W. Bush and Barack Obama.
Yeah, right.
You'd be helpful if you all would do something, please. Yeah. Folks, do subscribe. You're missing something. I'm not just saying that because Eric's a friend. If you're not subscribed to Pressrun.media, you're missing something. Check it out. You will be the better for it. You will be more informed. And Lord knows we all are weary of what's reported to us as mainstream every day. And let's face it, those who listen to this show don't look at news the same way as average people do anyway. Like us, you're like Eric and me. So do subscribe to Pressrun.media. Eric, thanks as always, buddy.
All right, have a great one.
All right, you too. Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.